Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from Yarkspiri fantasyart.com, and today I'm actually working on a wood nymph, and this was once again a request by one of you guys, my subscribers. So in the requirements for this illustration, it was that it be, first of all, a wood nymph who was starting to become fused with the forest and surroundings, and that she might have some ability or control over the vegetation and the elements in her environment. So for this reason, the first thing I referenced for this piece was wood barks. I actually looked at other interpretations of the wood nymph mythology, and I actually looked also in my dictionary to make sure I understood what was involved when it came to that type of creature. So this type of creature is more of associated to a very specific element or environment element. Although I wanted this character to have a very much a fused aspect to her, I did also still want her to be unique to her environment as well. So there are certain portions of her that are almost fused or almost exactly textured and drawn as her environment, but there's also different aspects that makes her unique. So I did take a lot of the elements that was provided within this piece, and I worked with it to create this drawing. Now, I was barely able to salvage a significant portion of this video due to file corruption issues. So my editing process within the center portion of this video won't be the best. I do apologize for that. Now, because I'm actually not able to interactively view this as I'm recording too, because it's actually killing my computer, I'm just going to go over some of my drawing processes and techniques instead. So when I'm working with an image like this, because it is so technical, I do start creating quite a few layers, but I do try to keep as much of my layers within reasonable amount so that's easier for me to do my editing afterwards. So in this case, just a grayscale portion of the character alone probably had about 3 or 4 layers to her. Now, because there were certain elements I was trying to figure out, like the foot that was underneath her other leg, I did have to figure out correctly how that would work, the perspective, the structure. So that element, although it was very technically difficult, I did not have to include that on a different layer. Elements, however, that I did have to include on a different layer were aspects of her face anatomy, because I did want her to have an almost alien-like and unique type of element to her facial structure. So it still needed to look somewhat human, because I did want her to be somewhat human, but a lot of the elements I had to separate out so that it was easier for me to edit and move if I needed to. So the eyes were specifically an area that I had to separate from the rest of the painting below it, but the face was generally in the same area. The hair element was once again a separate element I had to separate out just to make sure I had that added flexibility that I needed for this character. Now for the hair, I was using my special brush that I have been using as of late. Once again, though, it's not a necessity. There is quite a bit of editing that I do by hand too, just to get those added details. You can get the same effect just by minimizing your soft brush to the minimum size until you can't see it anymore, and you'll get the exact same effect. Now for drawing the bark, what I noticed when I was looking at my reference is that in order to keep it organic looking is you do have to include light and dark areas even within the shadows. So the way the bark is generally structured is it breaks out and it separates and cracks. So there's a lot of areas that I had to add cracks in and make sure that there's enough contrast between those cracks so that they really popped and created that crackling effect. Also, another thing that helped for me to actually draw out and render out this bark is the fact that I made sure I had a lot of sharp edges. and a lot of edges that looked like they were almost like scales in a way, but deformed scales on top of each other. So by doing this, I was able to get the unique texture that I wanted for this character. Now, another important thing though is I wanted to also have branches sticking out in general areas. So there was very specific areas that I wanted some extra detail, and I wanted those branches to come out of the character. But I had to tie it into the existing elements, which was the bark-like texture. So in order to do that, what I did is I made sure to slowly decrease the amount of patterns as I was moving from the skirt area to the hip area where I have the branches sticking out. So by doing that, I was able to get a nice flow. And also structurally, if you were to plan it out almost like a 3D map on top of the character, that's essentially the type of shape and flow that you would see in the actual 3D model as well. So by doing that, I was able to get that very unique hip structure and those elements flowing into each other. Now, another thing I had to do for this piece, because in this case, the focus wasn't just on the character too. The character was part of another element, and that other element was an extension of the character. So for this reason, I had to put as much detail as I had in the character drawing as I did in the tree and some of the surrounding areas to make sure it fit with the overall layout. So the same texture techniques that I added in the skirt, I made sure to add in the tree trunk and repeat that general structure once again so that both elements flowed together and looked like a single element within it. Now, once I had my basic character elements and tree elements already planned out, and those were fully rendered as best as possible, I began working on the background elements for this piece. So I was experimenting with a slightly different approach for the background elements. Normally what I do is I soften out the backgrounds manually with an overlay that I apply to that. And I do this for a couple of reasons. It's generally a lot faster. It's a lot simpler. But this time I actually wanted to apply a different painting technique to achieve the same effect. So what I was doing is I was slowly decreasing the opacity of my brush as I was moving further away from the character. And I was also using my eraser tool to erase anything that I deemed as being too much detail for that distance. By doing that, I actually got a pretty nice effect for the background elements, which do make them fairly unique from what you may have seen me do in the past. So right now, I have my video that's actually playing again because it's past that problematic area, so I can actually talk you guys through my drawing process again. So I'm starting to work on the head portion, almost horn-like portion of the character. And the way I'm doing that is I'm still applying the same techniques that I applied for the skirt of the character into the horns. So what I've done is I've created a basic white outline to figure out, first of all, what the path of those branches would be. And then from there, I started adding some darker highlights to make sure that those elements looked as if they had different cracking surfaces. Because once again, everything has to tie into this overall element. If it doesn't, then it doesn't look like it fits. So I started actually working on the tree, as you can see. When I was first figuring out the tree, all I worked on was the basic black and white silhouette. Once again, plotting out that white outline to give me a rough base from which to start. at which point I started really lowering the size of my brush so I can get harsher lines, and I could start building up that texture that I was talking about previously, because I really wanted that bark texture to really show up behind this character, because once again, she's part of this element. It's part of her. It's a very significant aspect that I do have to concentrate on to make sure that everything fits. So I have to spend that extra time to treat this tree like its own element, and it's incorporated essentially with this character. Another big focus for this was making sure that I had enough lighting for this, so I was really bumping up the contrast between the different bumps and cracks on this, making sure I had the correct lighting as well. I have a different light source than what I normally use. It's on the other side of the character. It's also further back, and she's hidden by from most of the light. But even though she's hidden, I need to include enough reflected light off the bark in order to make her stand out, also still as a separate element from that tree. So that's something I had to concentrate on, because it's very difficult to achieve, because you do have to make sure that you're not going too close, you're not exaggerating it too much either. Now, although I've worked out the general aspects of the rock, I do have to figure out the proper shadows once again, because the shadows haven't been elaborated on yet. So what I do is I generally create a new layer below the character preferably, and I sort of plot out the shadow in that manner. By doing that, it's a lot easier to do. I also achieve more realistic results as well, and it makes it a lot easier to modify if I have to as well. So I'm just working on the shadows, making sure some of those rocks really pop, making sure that it looks as if her leg is actually really grounded into that soil, because she's almost like a tree. She's part of this tree, so what would her feet be doing? They would probably be grounded just as much into the soil as the tree that she's essentially a part of. Right now I'm adding that tree element that shows her manipulation of other trees and foliage in general. So I want to give this tree that's coming out its own characteristic to make it look as if it's living. So for this reason, I decided to have both the character almost like telling this tree, oh, come here towards me, and then have this this branch go, oh wow, what's this? As if it was an actual person. There was actually emotion going through it. So that's something I really did want to portray in this, and I did work really hard in order to achieve that. As you can see, I'm just adding some of those extra details on the knee to make sure that it all fits. Now I've just added, because once again this is more of a tree nymph and she needs to relate color-wise as well to this element, I made sure to stick to mainly browns and greens, because those are the general colors that you would normally see in those type of elements. So although I added a sky and I did add some of those blue within the character, I did want to minimize that, and I didn't want to overdo those colors, because once again the main colors is part of the element that she's associated with, so that needs to show. Any of the highlights that I did, once again, there's some of the brighter colors related to those base colors that I already initially chose. So although it's a brownish yellow that I was using, I lightened that significantly in order to get some of those extra highlights. And I did the reverse also for her shadows for this character. Now in order to make sure that the tree branch looked more like it was curving, I did have to spend a little bit of extra time in order to do that. I must say I really enjoyed this piece, and I'll probably try doing something similar in the future. And thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you guys soon. So thank you and take care.